Here, so we are on air. Good morning, everyone, and this is Agile Mondays. Thank you for joining and welcome. My name is Elena Granyuk, and I'm responsible for the Central Eastern Europe at the SME Banking Club, and I will be your host today. And each Monday, I'm here with John Martens from Agile Business Consortium and Maria Sinica from Integrated Consulting Group. So thank you for joining, and hello.
Hello, indeed, Elena and Maria.
Hi. Great to see you again.
So before we go to the topic, a very short organizational moments from my side. So our webinar is scheduled for half an hour. The format is panel discussion, so you're welcome to type your questions right after we start, and we will be answering them, I think, on the go at once. And we are recording this webinar, so right after we finish, you will receive the link to the video. So today we would like to discuss the topic of delivering customer value, as this should be the highest priority for each organization and is one of the core Agile principles. So let's discuss how to provide customer value continuously in practice. And I'm passing a word at once to Maria and John. Maria, would you start?
Yes, hello again. Happy to see you again and sending my greetings from the heart of Transylvania. We are a bit on a road trip right now, hence the car. Hope the connection will be stable enough, so we will go through this. Otherwise, we will implement some Agile principles that we will make up on the spot. So, delivering customer value. This is actually, as Olena, you said, this is at the core of the Agile philosophy, and it's actually at the core of every company, because once you manage to find the way to the right combination into making your customer satisfied, this is actually ensuring the business success. And everybody's praising themselves that they have the customer in the core of their activities. But is it really like that? Is it really that all the companies are organized around delivering customer value? Or is it because or that companies are organized in a way that that make them more efficient, that serve their own processes better, and then a customer comes along the way sometimes. So what is actually the customer value, and how can we determine that customer value? How can we understand the customer in a way so that we organize our core activities around it, and we make sure that we deliver at our best? So this is why we thought that this topic will be very interesting for people joining our webinar. And I will start with a concept which is called gulf of evaluation. It's actually a lot of times is mentioned in the Agile books and the readings and whatever. And it's about the gap that you find between the customer, the Scrum Master, developers, and what actually the real need of the customer was. Without going into many details about what kind of Agile methodology is, basically this gap that we see here is something that is happening regardless of working Agile or not. But we want to talk about it in the context of Agile. So, what do you think, John, about this? What is your experience with the gulf of evaluation?
I think that this is fundamental. I think to the reason why Agile methodologies and indeed Agile as a principle, a set of principles, even emerged, because clearly the birth of Agile from originally from IT projects was built around the fact that what was originally if I put it, described by the customer and what was originally eventually delivered to the customer had such a very large gap between them, both in terms of the quality and the cost and the time and the features and everything else, that actually Agile was born out of this. So this gulf of evaluation, in a way, was the driver for the development of Agile. And I think one of the things that underpins this is, whether it is a product or a project or a service, the outcome always needs to be co-created with the customer. because actually the design of whatever eventually emerges has to start in the mind of the customer. And one of the great challenges that we've had in the past for almost until the birth of Agile really was we thought that design began after the customer had described what they wanted. But of course, actually, the design process starts in the customer's head and then needs to be transferred to us. So the sooner that we begin to work with the customer, the sooner we become customer orientated, the easier it is to get over this gulf of evaluation. So I think this is a fundamental principle for Agile.
Yes, and actually, we had so many. Oh, sorry. Usually, when you start with explaining on what you want to achieve, you have the tendency, as a customer, you have the tendency of going into details, but this is actually something that could work against you, because you should let the team understand your core need, and then depending on that, to organize themselves to deliver you best according to your core need. And actually, the customers do not know how their need would be satisfied. They have no idea, they have no clue how their problem will be solved. And this is one of the struggles that I've experienced also working in a large organization that is moving towards Agile and starting to have mixed teams. People that are trying to be very prescriptive in their need, in their solution, in what they need and what they believe the solution is, and in the end ending up being right. Because working with a team that is specialized, in this case working with an IT team, you are on the business side. You should explain what your need is. You should not explain what the technology should be and how you should reach it, because you are not a specialized person. And this is actually what you actually need as a customer, is something that it needs to be co-created together with team through a process of trial and error, exactly like you mentioned. What do you think, John, about this one?
I think perfect analogy, really. And if I think about this in the context of a bank, many banks now, many banks are trying to achieve this pure customer orientation and this co-creation by asking customers or seeking advice from customers on what features I as a customer might want in my SME bank account. But actually that's the wrong thing to do. I am in no position to design the features of an SME bank account. I'm an SME. I'm not a bank. What I should be doing, and indeed what the bank should be doing with me, is talking to me about the outcome that I want to achieve. What are the benefits that I want from my SME bank account, not what are the features. If we agree what the benefits are, then the bank actually is in a position to say, well, one of the ways we could achieve that benefit is to have these features, and then continually talk to me. But I know that we're going to talk about that principle in just a second.
Yes. Let's go to the next slide to uncover what we have here. So I put here as let's say on the same page to have a comparison between a waterfall delivery and an agile, without making Agile like the best solution for everything. I just want to stress the differences in the way the projects are realized in Waterfall and Agile. So Waterfall is the traditional project management, when you set a scope, you're detailing business case, and you start building from scratch, and then after everything is finalized, validate, and then you go to market, and you finalize everything, and you go to market. So, and this is actually very good for project, especially for industrial projects, or even so, you want to be waterfall, say for building a house. Yes, you don't want to improvise. You want to start with a hole in the ground, good foundation. You work it up from there. But the difference between pure industrial knowledge and the industrial processes and the knowledge processes is actually that in Agile you'd have a continuous deliveries. I had a discussion with one of my one of the companies that I've been working with, and the guy in the workshop had like an epiphany, and he said to me, "Oh, but they're like little waterfalls in a sprint." So because you always try to compare with something to you always try to have a mind map with something that you already know, and this could be the way. This was the way that that person could relate to. And actually, it's, if you want, it can be like this. But the way you organize, because see, maybe for both projects you end up in the same spot, or maybe it's different. But the difference is with the agile is that you deliver something that is small at the beginning, and the way to prioritize now becomes critical, because you need to understand what is the most valuable for the customer that you want to deliver as soon as possible. And this is how you actually organize your agile project. What is the piece of information that I have that is most valuable for a customer, and that if I deliver, he can picture it from there, and he can build up the image of his future product, and I actually can assist him in defining better the need that he has for his product. And here you have all sorts of prioritization techniques, and I should not go into details with those techniques, but this is actually the magic that you need to uncover from the business perspective in an agile project. What do you think, John?
Yeah,
I know that you have stuff on this one.
yeah, it's very interesting, because I remember having conversations about this within banks, and trying to explain actually that the waterfall process and waterfall principles are absolutely perfect where a situation is predictable. Where there is predictability, then planning is in a sense, almost the obvious way to go about this. And the predictability needs to be not just in the outcome, but in the likelihood of the outcome is being actively achieved. So once we can predict it, actually waterfall is a perfectly good way to go. Where there is uncertainty and unpredictability, I love that analogy about little waterfalls in a sprint, because the aim, in a sense, the aim of the agile principles is to reduce to the shortest possible time period such that there is some predictability in it. We can predict that today we will do this. In this week-long or 2-week or 6-week sprint, we will try and do this. But actually, the value of agility is that if that predictability isn't 100%, then the daily stand-ups, for example, will enable us to track that. So where there is predictability, waterfall is perfectly okay. Where there is unpredictability, actually the resilience, the flexibility, the adaptability that comes from an agile process is the optimal way to go about it. And I think the important thing here, and I know that you're going to talk about this in a second as well, is that if we keep having a look at how we're doing and we are talking to the customer whilst we are doing that, then we are keeping on track with the customer value. And that, after all, as you said at the beginning, is why we are doing this.
Yes, indeed. And actually, I have many ideas from what you said, and I want to add on, to build upon on what you said. The way that you're about starting with predictability, yes, the way that you determine the size of your sprint. Yes, the sprint is the time interval in which agile team is deciding to deliver some certain value to the client, incremental value to the client. Yes, and the way that you design the size of that sprint, be it 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, yes, it's actually depending on the degree of uncertainty that you have that is linked to the project that you're dealing with, or to the activity that you're dealing with. So, and this is wonderful about Agile, because you would have in the same company, but depending on the product and depending on the client segment that they serve, you'd have teams that would operate with 1 week sprints. And then at the same time, you'd have teams that would operate with 3-week sprints. For example, if I give the example of the bank, most likely the team that is dealing with delivering specifications for the core system of the bank, where you put all the accounts, yes, and everything, account information of the clients, you would think that that is a bit more stable, yes, because it's something that you don't want to mess up. It's the core of it's the bone of the bank, yes. But then you would have the team that is delivering maybe upgrades on the mobile app. You would have a team that is having shorter sprints, because there you really have the user experience kicking in and giving feedback very quickly. You receive feedback via the app very, very quickly. So the way you adjust also the sprint is something that you as a company can decide, and you as a team actually can decide where it fits better. Because Agile, a lot of people believe that Agile is a bit chaotic, and then it's an excuse that for every day to change our plans, basically. But it's not really like that. It's an agile project or an agile delivery actually is extremely focused within a sprint to deliver what they have determined at the beginning of the sprint as being the most valuable thing for the customer at that moment, considering the knowledge they had at that time. So we try to freeze the time if you want, because this is actually how you can focus. And if you're discussing with agile teams, you will see that they are all freaked out on protecting their sprint. Actually, and this is the resemblance with the cousin lean, because you don't want to create waste. If you, in the middle of a sprint, you decide you do something else, what it actually means is that you wasted half of your time. You did not finish. Whatever is not finished, it doesn't matter, because it's not useful for a customer. And not delivering customer value is actually the most demotivating thing for an agile team. And they would want to protect that as much as possible within the sprint.
Yep. Absolutely, and interestingly, I mentioned, I think in one of our earlier sessions, Jeff Bezos says that we should always focus on the things that do not change. So for Amazon, customers will always want faster deliveries and lower prices. So he knows that Amazon can almost afford to take a waterfall approach to ensuring that they deliver those things, because they know that that will always provide customer value. With the bank, the idea of I want security. I'm an SME. I bank with a bank. I want security in that bank. I want access to my money anytime I want it. I want speed of transactions. These things don't change in the provision of customer value. So the basic things within the bank that provide those things can be approached on a waterfall basis. It's the things which are either uncertain or which are subject to change, like, for example, as far as the app is concerned, as you mentioned, or app development or app provision changes constantly all the time. So that is clearly a beneficial place in which to apply agile principles. Cool. Okay. So I know you wanted to talk also about iterating things for the customer.
Yes, and with the end of every sprint, exactly as you mentioned, John, with the end of every sprint, I'm checking in with the customer, and I see, and I'm actually wasting, if you may, if I'm on the wrong track, I'm wasting just a sprint, just 1, 2, 3 weeks maximum. If I'm on the wrong track, because I'm always asking the customer, is this what you wanted? Is this what you expected? Does this satisfy your need? What shall we build from there? Because actually what it happens, and it happened to me as well as a customer, as an internal customer, yes, for the Agile team, I was, when seeing a product that was, let's say, halfway done in my mind, but actually when I was able to already use it, I realized that not all the feature I needed at the end. And in this way, it could help save money, because you're not stuck with the mountain of the specification that you have in a waterfall project at the beginning. I'm actually starting to use some of the stuff, and I'm realizing that, I'm better off without the rest of the specification, and I can actually move to a different project. And this is again very valuable in an agile project versus the waterfall. But as I'm always saying with the companies that I'm working with, you can only apply agile where the client wants it as well, because client has to pick up the phone when you ask them for their feedback. If the client is not there, basically being agile is just questionable because
Wow.
it
Yeah,
doesn't serve you.
this is very interesting. Sorry to interrupt, because
Yes.
the for the team, the minimum viable product, if you like, is minimum necessary waste. So that's the idea at the end of the
Yes.
sprint, check in with the client, minimum necessary waste. For the organization as a whole, that means minimum necessary risk. And that's very good,
Ah,
because that's how
yes.
a bank certainly works. For the customer, that's the minimum necessary dissatisfaction, because we limit the amount of and dissatisfaction is just negative customer value. However, the point that you make is the crucial one, which is necessary dissatisfaction. That right at the start, the customer needs to agree to the agile process, because there is some dissatisfaction going to be necessary. The point of doing things in an agile way is finding out what isn't providing customer value and stopping doing it. Because if it was all definitely going to provide customer value, we wouldn't need to do it in an agile way. It's identifying the problem. So yeah, absolutely right. The customer needs to commit. And this is back to this idea of actually the outcome is co-created between the bank and the SME, between the team and the customer. And if either of them doesn't commit to that co-creation, it can't happen effectively.
Exactly. And I actually have a case with a company that they are discussing, and they are running all sorts of agile projects, and they are internal projects, so done with support departments. It actually is little to none IT involvement. It's various business lines, and the internal client is actually the board of the company, and the board is not available for feedback, but every 3 months. And the board also said that the project should be done in an agile way. This is actually the part which is very confusing to people. And this is actually also the connection that the senior management has to make when it starts to embark on agile way of working. They would have to be there to available to give feedback for their teams with every iteration that the team has. They will not be able to give all the specification and then we hear each other in 3 months, because that is waterfall. And you see that not always this connection is made by the board. What
Yeah,
do you think?
and this actually is crucially important within a bank, because a bank
Yeah.
is a very large organization where the board, and it might, obviously, of course, it might be the senior board, it might be the board of a national division within the bank. It might just be actually a divisional board, just the SME banking group, for example. However, there is likely to be quite a distance between that group,
Yeah.
that client group, and the team who are delivering. And unless that client group, you're quite right, unless that client group, board or whoever it is, responds with yes when the team says, okay, we'll check in with you every week, then actually it's not going to work. And there have been, I know I've been with people who have had really serious arguments, essentially, with commissioning boards within banks, because the board will say, look, just go away and do it and come back with it finished in 6 months. But do it in an agile way.
Exactly. And I've seen a lot of internal discussions and the friction and tension because of that. It's true, yes. And that would take us to our final slide, in which I wanted to say here, because we're constantly talking to delivering business value. But business value is it has to be regarded not only in the sense of the plus that you can add for the customer, but also in the sense of the amount of risks that you can minimize for the customer. So once an agile team is fully understanding the value, what is value, and actually what is threatening the value, an agile team would be the core team that would be very focused on minimizing the risk. And this is something, again, I'm also discussing with a bank. And this connection by the risk management of a bank is very difficult to be made, because risk management, of course, they need to defend their position, they need to defend the risks, let's say. But at the same time, true risk management in a bank is actually built within an agile team, where the team is focused on also diminishing as many risks as possible as early as possible, because risk is an anti-value. Risk is something that is threatening the value to my customer. And this is how we reached the last slide. I put here at the bottom the evolution of the business value delivered and the evolution of the risk mitigation within an agile development versus a traditional waterfall development. And you see, with an agile development, with every iteration that I make, I add an increment to the product that I'm delivering to the customer. Whereas in a traditional development, the customer will see something at the end. Yes, so. And I put here, it's a bit controversial, the picture of the MVP. I do not want to launch in the discussion of the full MVP, the lean, in the lean startup methodology, because I know the guys are really close to lean startup will say, yes, an MVP is something that you can also scale. I agree with that. But just for the sake of simplifying, let's say, as much as possible, I put this picture in the sense that, okay, we have a customer that is basically tired of walking. Yes. And then what do you deliver to that customer? In a traditional development, in 3 months, you give them a car. That is wonderful. In an agile development, you give them a skateboard, and then you run through the stages as depicted there. And actually, you might even stop at phase 3 or 4 because the customer is fully satisfied with what they have, and you don't need to add more cost to the project. What if this customer was, say, somebody that is not yet legally allowed to drive? You would actually stop at step number 3. So this is, I like this metaphor of delivering bit by bit, because it eases up the process of, it actually satisfies the customer early, and also you understand the customer better. I also give another example of a customer that is working in an agricultural field, and then when they saying to you at the beginning that I'm tired of walking, I want to have a higher speed, whatever. And then in the middle of the development, you would discover that they're actually working on an agricultural field. So delivering them the best BMW might not be the best idea when it's raining. They actually need, a big agricultural machine, or how do you call that, tractor or something.
Tractor, yeah. Yeah, well, this is very interesting, because if I think of this, I love this analogy that goes from the skateboard to the car. But if I think of this in bank terms, for example, an SME bank account, a bank may decide, what we need is a new bank account for SMEs that will just blow the market away completely. Okay, I want it to have absolutely everything. I want it to have foreign exchange, factoring, growth capital, absolutely everything that any SME could possibly want. So they spend 6 months, 12 months, 18 months developing this. They launch it on the marketplace, and for some reason, it doesn't take off. And the reason why it doesn't take off is most SMEs don't want a car, as we see from this analogy. Most SMEs don't want an all singing, all dancing bank account. Actually, what most SMEs want is a relatively straightforward way to get more value out of their relationship with money. And because SMEs are all different, that is different for each SME. So the idea of saying to SMEs, look, tell you what, we've got a bank account here. Of course, you can deposit, you can get some loans, stuff like this. We can also do some factoring because we've done some research that says actually SMEs in your sector might find some benefit in being able to factor some of their debts and stuff like this. Maybe then that's in a sense, that's from the skateboard to the scooter or whatever it is. That iterative development works because if we look at the analogy from skateboard to car, we are slightly biased in looking at that analogy. And this is where the people from Lean, for example, might not be happy with, can't scale this or that. We're slightly biased because we all know already what a car is. We all know how it works and what it does. And we all know what a skateboard or a scooter is. However, we don't all know what an effectively operating SME bank account looks like. And actually, that needs to start with the minimum viable product because every SME is different. So in a way, that idea that I mentioned earlier on about the MVP is minimum necessary risk for the organization. Yes, it is, because as you quite rightly said, the team itself will be trying desperately to strip out risk because they don't want to take a risk in missing customer value or providing negative value. They want something that makes the customer go, wow, yeah, this is great. So that iterative development reduces risk to absolute minimum from the very start because the team, the Agile team, will do that on purpose. They will strip out as much risk as they possibly can. And I think in doing so, in fact, I'll say it slightly differently. The only way to do so is to provide improved value very quickly. Because risk and value, as you said, risk, negative value. So actually, I think the two charts are really, really good descriptors of how value and risk have a relationship and how engaging with the customer in an agile way limits the risk that accrues in that relationship. Nice analogy. Yeah, good.
Thank you. Thanks.
Actually, as we are coming to the close, so we are almost off of our time. My question here is, from your experience, are actually SME or business customers ready to cooperate or to collaborate within this agile process? And maybe very short summary from your side. What are the tips or the advice for the banks to how to provide this customer value continuously?
Oh, good question. Trying as a bank to deal with 5 million SMEs, which would be the case in the UK, quite difficult actually to talk to 5 million people at the same time. So in a sense, the optimum way to do this is to identify channels who already talk to SMEs. So what clusters of SMEs exist? Is it a particular supply chain, for example, in the aerospace or the automotive sector? Let's talk to them about their particular issues. Is it a particular geography of SMEs? So it's finding clusters of SMEs who will be able to identify similar problems and challenges that they face and having a conversation with them. And to be honest, whether, in a sense, there's no way to get away from it. That conversation or those conversations need to be ongoing all the time. There is no point at which a bank can say, that's it now, we've got our perfect SME product. It's never going to happen.
I agree.
Yes,
of course.
And the only, I could add to what John mentioned. I could add the fact that I could actually share one of the experiences I had on building a product that, well, we were just about to start building a product that nobody cared about, but internally sounded perfectly okay. The way you do it is not actually that you get the clients, because SME clients, as you mentioned, John, are thousands, hundreds of thousands, yes? You don't actually get the client at the end of every 2 weeks. You call them and say, hey, listen, I give you this, because it will not work like this, indeed. But here it comes when you combine the agile way of working with different techniques to launch and design products, such as design thinking and lean startup. And then you do not delegate this way of designing the product, you do not actually get the internal feedback from the relationship managers. This is important that for the team that who designs the product would actually have a check-in directly with the customer to see how the customer is using their own product. So for the people in head office, I would say make a habit of calling your customer, of meeting with the customer on a regular basis. It does not have to have statistical relevance. I assure you, you don't need to have, to start to do profiling of the customer and meeting 200 customers. It doesn't work like this, because actually they will provide you feedback, and from the first 10 meetings that you'll have, you start to get a sense of it. But this should be a lifestyle. This should not be something that we do as a funny project and then we get on with our lives, in which we design products without involving the customer. So involving the customer with the design thinking techniques to empathize as much as possible, and then applying Lean Startup to understand what is my hypothesis in designing this product, how shall I test it, how do I measure the test, and what is success and what is not. This is something that you need to define upfront, so that you don't have your bias. Internal bias. You think everybody thinks their own idea are great, but we need to validate them somehow. We need to attach numbers to them to make what we are delivering is something that the customer cares about. It's not just a nice product that sounds nice internally. So that was my add-on to John.
Yes, very nice. So delivering the customer value and actually working in Agile should be a lifestyle, then it works. Yes, great. Thank you very much for today's discussion, and see you next Monday, as usual, 11 a.m. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.